Good day, brethren, and welcome to another 5-minute Sunday School session. Last session we discussed Division 1 of Lesson 10, God's Grace Sufficient for Paul. We had discussed about the conversion and call of Paul in his expedition to Damascus and how he began his course for the gospel. In Division 2 today, we will be discussing how Paul continues to pursue Christ's knowledge by desiring more of Christ and by reaching out to the Gentiles. So let's dive in. Section A, by desiring more of Christ. Before the conversion of Paul, he was not just an ordinary person by human standards. He had a proud heritage, having been born an Israelite of the Benjamite tribe. He was circumcised according to the law and tradition of the Jews. He belonged to the Pharisee sect, who were distinguished by the strict observance of the Jewish laws and traditions. Paul was not just a Pharisee. As discussed in our last session, he was a very zealous Pharisee. He had all to be proud of with regards to being a Jew. But Paul says in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 7 that these things that he once considered gain, he now counts as loss for the sake of Christ. In other words, the person of Christ has taken over his heart from all these other things in his life. He now considers Christ as the most important over everything else. He has developed a passion for that Christ that he once stood firmly against. He now desires to know more of Christ and to fellowship with him. So Paul said, I count all these things loss for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. I have suffered the loss of all things, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. So Paul continues saying that he doesn't consider himself to be perfect, but he forgets the things that are behind him and presses on in his focus towards the goal of knowing Christ. So whenever Paul has the opportunity, he tells his conversion story all over, even in the face of great persecution. Paul was bold to testify of his new life in Jesus, even before kings like Agrippa in Acts chapter 26. Paul further tells us in Philippians chapter 3 verse 18 and 19 that there are some whose God is their belly, whose glory is their shame, men who have set their minds on earthly things. So is your God your belly? Is your mind set on earthly gains, on money, comfort, or fame? Let Jesus be your focus. Don't be ashamed of being connected to Jesus. Let him be your all. Don't let the world attract you. Paul is an example to us of one who has forsaken all for the sake of Christ. So, section B, by reaching out to the Gentiles. Paul's passion for Jesus did not stop at wanting to know more of this Christ, but in fulfilling the mandate that Jesus has given to him. While talking to Agrippa, Paul said, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, first to those in Damascus, then to those in Jerusalem and in all Judea, and then to the Gentiles. Paul responded to the great commission of Christ with all faithfulness. In Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 1, he said he had become a prisoner of Christ Jesus for the sake of the Gentiles. He sees his mission to the Gentiles as a grace given to him. He has become passionate to see the Gentiles become heirs together with Israel through the gospel of Christ. Paul says, I become a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace given me through the working of his power. So Paul always prayed for the Gentiles. He says in Romans chapter 1 from verse 9 to 10 of how he constantly remembers the church of Rome in his prayers at all times. He kept thanking God because of the grace that was given to the Corinthians and the Ephesians, and he continually prayed for them. How passionate are we today towards unbelievers around us coming to Jesus Christ? How many of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues do we spend time to pray for so that they are not lost in their sins? Paul, again, is a great example for us. Paul traveled far and wide, first to Cyprus, to Pamphylia, in the present-day Turkey, to Phrygia, to Lycaonia, Galatia, Asia, Macedonia, Achaia, and Greece, proclaiming the gospel of Jesus. He went on 4 missionary journeys. He followed up with letters. Paul wrote at least 13 letters to the churches in Rome, Corinth, Galatia, Philippia, Colossae, Ephesus, and Thessalonica, and to individuals like Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. He may also have written the book of Hebrews. Paul's life is a testimony to seeking Christ and seeking the lost for Christ. At some point while he was going through difficulties, Paul had said, just as we read in our memory scriptures, that the Lord said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Lesson summary. Jesus should become our focus, the one to whom we fix our gaze. His purpose for our lives should be our greatest desire, and we should not relent until he calls us home to himself. May we be truly zealous in seeking him more and in fulfilling his purpose till the very end. So here we conclude lesson 10. Join us next week as we go on to lesson 11. Have a great week ahead. God bless you.